So we have this in this parsha, the culmination of the Yosef saga. You have Divrei Hayamim over here, also, somewhere.
Yeah, right here.
Good. Okay, fine. The culmination of the Yosef saga. Now, we haven't really talked about the Yosef narrative too much in the course of these discussions over here. But on Parashat VaYigash, I'd like to discuss it because I think that there's some very, very important details of the story that are often overlooked and which really warps the entire understanding of the story. And one very important detail in particular, and that one detail is that it is absolutely 100% clear, and again, this is my opinion, but I'm very adamant on it, it's very clear from the story that Yosef the entire time believes that his father had conspired with his brothers to kick him out of the family. And this is what Yosef is working, this is the belief that Yosef has for the entire time. And this is the basis for his whole behavior. During this, it's 20 years, more than 20 years, from the time that he leaves Canaan to the time where he has this reunion with his brothers now. Right, it's at least 20 years because he starts working for Paro when he's 30, and the 7 years of plenty go by, so that he's 37, at least 37. So it's more than 20 years. Anyway, so let's just review the story and see how this in fact plays out. Sorry?
It says 22 years.
So it doesn't say explicitly in the Psukim how many years of the plenty. Actually, it's not true. It does say explicitly. It says V'od chamesh shanim asher ein charish v'chatzir. Yes, it's true. So that we're in year 2 of the famine. Right. So it's 22 years exactly. That's correct. So we're going all the way back to Parashat VaYeshev. So in Parashat VaYeshev, the pasuk makes very, very clear that Yosef is a little bit on the narcissistic side. He's clearly his father's favorite child. The pasuk makes this clear. Chazal chastise Yaakov for doing that. Right, the Gemara in Megillah says, I'll stay litros klei melat on two measures of fabric. Right, there became a huge schism within the Jewish people that ended up leading the Jewish people into slavery. Right, the 2 measures of fabric that made Joseph's coat. On that favoritism, that was the impetus that started the whole process leading the Jewish people to slavery. So clearly, this is what's going on. There's favoritism going on. There's a little bit of narcissism. He tattles on his brothers, and there's a tremendous amount of animosity here. And he becomes so arrogant, so comfortable in his haughtiness that he's willing to share in public these dreams of explicit self-aggrandizement. Now, having dreams about yourself, about your potential, is not a bad thing. As we see, these dreams actually come to fruition. But, there's a way of going about it. And this is clearly not the right way of going about it. And after the second dream, even his father, who likes him, who prefers him, who knows that he has potential, who knows that there's actually a possibility for these dreams to come true. So by the second dream, Yaakov says, "Vayigar bo aviv." Vayigar bo. Vayigar is not a particularly common word. It's a very aggressive word. It means to chastise someone in a state of wrath. Gara. Vayigar bo aviv. His father chastises him and says, "What are you intending to say? Are you implying that me and your mother and all your brothers are meant to bow down to you?" Now, the pasuk, the next pasuk makes clear, "Va'aviv shamaras hadavar," meaning his father kept it to himself, that he thought, well, maybe there is some truth to these dreams. This is actually predicting something in the future. But Yaakov doesn't say that. He doesn't say to the people there, to Yosef or to the brothers, that this is what he's thinking. All the brothers know, and all Yosef knows for that matter, is that his father is rebuking him, right? And his favoritism doesn't save him. He's put in line. What's the very, very next scene that we have? Yaakov calls Yosef in and says, "Listen, your brothers are in some far-off place with the sheep. Go take a hike. Check on your brothers." Now, as the pasuk says, before he even gets there, the brothers see him, and they decide that they're going to kill him. So just think of the whole progression from Yosef's experience. He was just chastised by his father and put in line and put in check. He said, "Listen, you're going a little bit too far with this firstborn favorite child thing. It's completely inappropriate. Don't imply that your father and your mother and all your family is going to have to bow down to you and you're in charge. It's just totally inappropriate." And the very next thing, he's told to go take a walk. And always told to go take a walk, but he goes to the place and there's no one there, right? As the story says, he goes to where they're supposed to be in Shechem, and no one's there. And he says, "Oh yeah," and he meets some guy, and the guy says, "Yeah, I saw that they went to the area of Dotan, so go over there. Maybe you'll find them there." And he goes, and the second he gets there, what happens? They jump him. They grab him. They take off his coat, right? The symbol of his favoritism. And they throw him into a pit. And then the next thing he knows, he's being taken down to Mitzrayim. Another point worth highlighting at the Pshat level is that I think that it's very clear, again, purely at the Pshat level, that the brothers were not the ones who sold him. They were not the ones who sold him. They were not involved in his sale even. Rather, the Yishmaelim who came, they pulled him out before the brothers had a chance to get back, and they sell him, and they sell, right, the Midianites, the Ishmaelites, and then eventually gets to Egypt. How do we know that? What's the proof that the brothers did not have anything to do with the sale? Because in last week's parsha, in Miketz, when the brothers come and meet this mysterious man, and they get into this whole bureaucratic nightmare, and they're being threatened to be charged as spies, so they say, what goes around comes around. The fact that we were so horrible to our brother, this is why we're suffering. V'gam damo hinei nidrash. His blood is calling out for vengeance. Meaning, they think that he's dead. If they had anything to do with his sale, there would be no reason for them to assume that he was dead. Rather, they actually thought that he was dead.
Is that what's said
What?
Pshat? That's what's said Pshat in this week's Parsha?
That what?
Where Yehuda says that one of my brothers is dead.
Ve'echad einenu.
One of us.
Yeah, exactly. And one of us is no longer. Which is a polite way of saying he's not alive anymore. Yeah. It's just clear that the brothers think that Yosef is dead. So you can see that every one of the parties, Yosef, Yaakov, and the brothers, they all think different things happened. Yosef thinks that he was set up by his brothers and his father. The brothers thinks that he died somehow. They don't know how, but they think that he's dead. And Yaakov thinks that, Chaya Ra'ah Chalasu, that some wild animal got him. So it's true that Yaakov and the brothers both think that he's dead, but through different circumstances. Everyone thinks something else happened. Yosef names his child after the ability to disconnect from his father's house. Kinashani Elokim, es kol amali es kol savi. That God allowed me to forget, to detach myself from all of the strife of my father's house. This explains, by the way, the very common question as to why Yosef, when he achieves power in Egypt, doesn't bother trying to make contact with his father. Would you bother trying to make contact with your father? If you really thought that your father had kicked you out of the family and sold you into slavery, you probably also wouldn't want to contact your father. So this is Yosef's understanding for the entire time. Now, there is an abrupt shift, obviously, in Parshas Miketz when the brothers come down to Mitzrayim. Now, I want to just analyze these psukim in Parshas Miketz because they also give us very, very important insight. Again, at the pshat level, as to the progression of the narrative and why Yosef chooses to interact with his brothers in this way. So, the scene is the brothers come. The brothers of Yosef come down to Egypt, all 10 of them. And Binyamin is held back, as we know. Yaakov doesn't want to send him out, even though, right, he's an adult. He's in his 30s already, but he doesn't let him leave the country because God forbid something's going to happen to him. Yeah. Anyway, the brothers come. Yosef hu ashalit al haaretz, so mashbiras kol haaretz, and since he has this high position, so any suspicious groups of newcomers, they're all brought before Yosef. Vayavo achay Yosef yishachvu lo apayim arza, and they all bow down to him. Vayar Yosef esachav vayakirem. Yosef sees his brothers, and he recognizes them. Vayisnaker alehem, vayidaber itam kashos. What does that word mean? Vayisnaker alehem. So one possible explanation of Vayisnaker is like Miloshon Nochri. He made himself appear to them as a foreigner. Vayisnaker alehem. Meaning he doesn't say, hi, I'm your brother. Rather, he acts like a foreigner. The opposite of, hi, I'm your brother. That's one way of explaining it. But Onkelos says something very, very interesting. We were just talking about Onkelos, Yoni and I, about how he adds sometimes whole sentences into the psukim. But here he's certainly adding something. Says Onkelos on this pasuk. This is pasuk Zayin, Perek Mem Aleph pasuk Zayin. V'chaza Yosef yasachoy. Yosef sees his brothers v'ishtamodinun, and he recognizes them. Ishtamodinun means he recognized them. That's what that word means in Aramaic. Now, what is the word vayisnaker? How does he translate that word vayisnaker aleim? V'chashuv ma diyamalun lahon. He strategizes at that moment what he's going to tell them. V'chashuv ma diyamalun lahon. Why does he do that? Why does he have to think? Because he realizes at that moment, right, as it says, he remembers the dreams that he had dreamt about them. What were those dreams implying? Whatever the symbolism of the wheat and the stalks of wheat, and they're all bowing down to him, regardless of the details of the dream. The very fact that there is a dream with him and the brothers in the same dream, multiple dreams, not just one dream, the very fact that there is such a dream implies what? That he's not meant to be kicked out of the family. That there's supposed to be some type of togetherness here. Right? That at the very least, that's what the dreams are implying. So now he's in this situation. He's for more than 20 years. He has a complete direction in his life. He thinks he's no longer part of the Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov project. He's now an Egyptian. He's going to make his career in the Egyptian government. He's doing very well for himself. And now at this moment, he realizes, wait a minute. There's a possibility that there's some piece here that I have to reconsider. And that forces him to, as Onkelos says, chashuv madi malon. He has to strategize. And what's the strategy? So this is my understanding of what it means that he has to strategize. If you're Yosef, again, the trick here is to look at the whole progression through Yosef's lens. If you're Yosef and you think that the father and that your father and your brother conspired to sell you. Clearly, the brothers did something to you. That's not a question because you experienced it. But the question is, what actually happened? Who was in on it? What did they intend to do to him? And who was involved with what? Now, in order for him to know that, in order for him to know the answers to these questions, he can't ask them. He can't just say, "Hi, I'm Yosef. Would you mind telling me the whole background?" He can't ask them out front, right? Straight up, rather. He has to orchestrate the situation to produce that information in an organic way. He has to find that out, because if they're going to be together as a family, he has to know what exactly is going on. And now, what are the things that you have to know the answers to? Again, you're Yosef. What are the things that you need to know? A, what we just said a second ago. What actually happened? B, do they regret what they did? Maybe for all you know, they think, yeah, good riddance. Yeah, this was a premeditated selling our brother into slavery because he was a bad guy, and we're totally at peace with that. Could be, right? And if that's the case, then you're in trouble, right? Do they regret it? And B, who was in? And C, who was in on it? Who was actually involved? He doesn't know the details of, Ruvain faked being in on it, but he really wanted to save them, and Yaakov totally wasn't in on it. He doesn't know. He doesn't know who was in on it and who wasn't in on it. So he needs to find out all those things. And again, he can't ask any of those questions. He has to extract that information organically. Yeah, you were going to say something, Yoni? No? Okay. So this is the chashuv madi malon. He has to think about how to. So at that moment he comes up with a plan. And the plan is he's going to get the brothers into a situation where they're pressured enough that they have to give over the background of what's going on. They have to give it over. You see that Yosef cries at several junctures in this story. Each one of the times he cries is when he finds out an answer to one of these questions. Okay? There's one exception. The one exception is the fourth time he cries. But that's when he sees his brother Binyamin, which is right. It says explicitly there that he cries because he sees Binyamin Achiv Ben Imo, right, his one whole brother from both parents, and he's just overwhelmed by emotion, so he cries. That's the fourth time, but that's not relevant. The other times that he cries is when he finds an answer to this question. What's the first time he cries when the brother when it says that he takes Shimon, right, as prisoner, and he hears the brothers speaking, saying that we did this, because we did this to our brother 20 years ago, so this is coming around to seek retribution for what we did. The passage that we quoted a second ago, right? His blood is calling out for vengeance. When Yosef hears this, he goes and cries. Why does he cry? Because he hears that the brothers actually regret what they did. Not only that, but Reuven wasn't even in on it. Reuven says, "I told you, al techatu b'yeled, don't sin against the boy." Right? So we see that not only do they regret it, but not all of them were even in on it. So that's like the first thing. So he sees, okay, so they're not still upset at me, they're not angry at me, they actually regret what they did to me. Okay? Now, in this week's parasha, this is when it hits really it's clearly the climax, but something very, very powerful happens at the beginning of Parashat VaYigash. So Yehuda goes and he's asking he's trying to bargain his way out of the situation that they're in, that Binyamin is going to be kept behind, and he's going to have to face his father without Binyamin. So what does Yehuda say? So Yehuda is reviewing the story from the beginning. Yesh lanu av zakein. I told my master, meaning you, the viceroy of Egypt. Yesh lanu av zakein. We have an old father. V'yad zakenim katon, and he had a precious son. V'achiv meis, and his brother died. So we see also that Yaakov thinks that Yosef is dead. Right? We see, right? That's also something that he finds out now. Vayivaser hu levado li'imo v'aviv vayivo, and only Binyamin is left from his beloved wife. And you, Yosef, told us that I will not agree to give you any more food unless you bring him down and I can see him with my own eyes. If you make Binyamin leave my father, then my father's going to be so crushed from anxiety and fear, he's going to die. He says, no, this is a deal breaker. There's no way. I'm not going to negotiate on this point. Either bring Binyamin down or no deal. So we went back, we told our father that you wouldn't budge and that you had to see Binyamin. Under no circumstances would you not agree to see Binyamin. And finally our father agreed, right? There's no way for us to see the man, meaning Yosef, without our brother with us. And our father said to us, two children were born to me from my wife, meaning Rachel. And one of them, i.e. Yosef, left me. And I haven't seen him until now. He was eaten by a wild animal in a horrible accident, and I haven't seen him since. And you're going to take the other one, the other child of my favorite wife, and some other tragedy is going to befall him. And you're going to make the end of my life even more miserable than it is. What is Yosef hearing now for the first time? Yosef is hearing now for the first time that his father, not only did he not participate in selling him into slavery, but for the past 20 years, he's been sitting in perpetual mourning for his son, for his favorite son, to the point where he's not even willing to let the other son leave the country lest something happened to him and he lose the second one from his favorite son. Yosef is really realizing retroactively that the whole story that he had in his mind for 20 years, that his father had betrayed him, that his father had conspired to sell him into slavery, that wasn't true. That his father was suffering this the whole time because he thought that his son was dead. V'lo yachol Yosef liyitapek, and Yosef couldn't hold himself back. Hotziu kol ish mi'alai, and he yells, "Get everyone out of here!" Vayitenes kol bivchi, vayishmu mitzrayim v'yishma beis paro, vayomer Yosef alachav ani Yosef, ha'od avi chai. What do those words mean? Ha'od avi chai. Is that a question asking for information? Is my father still alive? It can't be that he's asking for information. because they're talking about the father. Clearly the father's alive. He's not asking information. This is a rhetorical question. Ha'od avi chai, how could it be that my father is still alive? Woe, my poor father, who's been suffering for so long. How is he still alive? This is the 180 turnaround that Yosef, after so many years of thinking that he's in one direction in his life, thinking that he's been completely removed from the house of Yaakov Avinu, and that he's been totally abandoned by his father and by his brothers, he's realizing retroactively that was all completely not true. Completely not true. This is an incredible personal redemption for Yosef, that he finds out that, yes, his brothers did do him very wrong, but they regret it, and they really feel bad about it. They really feel bad. They feel bad to the point that they're willing to self-sacrifice themselves for the sake of their father, and that, of course, his father, Yaakov, was never in on the sale, was never in on his betrayal. Now, for many years, I thought to myself, why that this is clearly true. This is clearly the facts of the story, that that Yosef is operating under certain assumptions, and that he has to orchestrate the situation in order to extract certain facts. And that was all clear. But the question that I had in my mind was, why was it necessary for this to be? Why did it need to be this way, that Yosef had no idea what was going on, that he was living for all this time in this state of ignorance? And this is actually a good question. Clearly, the circumstances worked out in such a way that Yosef was given a very clear message of something that was completely not the case. It's completely not the reality. Completely not the reality that his brothers even had anything to do with selling him to begin with, right? As we pointed out. And of course, his father was not in on it at all. But the circumstances played out in such a way that he was left with this very powerful impression that was what happened. Why was that necessary? So, there's a pasuk, there's a whole parak of Tehillim, which we've quoted a few times, I think, in the different contexts over here. Tehillim Kuf Hey. Tehillim Kuf Hey gives a brief review, let's say, of the entire story of Yosef and leading the Jewish people coming down to Mitzrayim. And indeed, it goes through the whole Yetzias Mitzrayim story as well, right? Everything. And the description of the Yosef story is as follows. Vayikra Rav al haaretz. God decreed that there would be a famine upon the land. Upon the whole land, not just Egypt, upon everything. As we see, the famine doesn't just hit Egypt, it hits the whole region. Kol matei lechem shavar. All sources of bread they broke. Sholach lifneihem ish. So what did God do? He sent before them a man. A man. Who's the man? Le'eved nimkar Yosef. Yosef was sold as a slave. It's funny because these are the two terms that are used to describe Yosef in the story. The ish. They're constantly calling him the man, the guy. Which, by the way, just at the pshat level, why do they call him the man? They're only calling him the man, the ish. Because this is a very strange position. He's like in charge of everything. He's running the whole show, but he's not Paro. Meaning, Paro invents this job position for Yosef. This job position didn't exist before Yosef got there. So when the brothers show up and they see that there's some guy in charge, but he's not Paro, they don't know what to call him. So they call him the man. That's why they call him the man. Anyway, so Linyanenu. Shalach ish le'eved nimkar Yosef. Inu bakevel raglo barzel ba nafsho. He was tormented and tortured with chains, meaning he's a kidnapped slave. It's like chattel slavery, the whole way. He's brought in chains against his will down to a foreign country, sold on the open market. Ad eis bo dvaro imras Hashem sarafasu. Until the word of God came. Ad eis bo dvaro. Imras Hashem, the word of God, sarafasu, forged him. Shalach melech vayatireu. God sent a king to remove him from prison. Right? Moshe Lamim vayifatcheu, the ruler of nations, and brought him out into. Hold on 1 second, the recording stopped. Okay, the ruler of nations being Paro, because obviously it's supposed to come about. Right? If you notice, the story starts with Vayikra Rav al haaretz. There was meant to be this famine. This famine was coming into the world. Yosef was the response to this. Yosef was the solution. There was a problem that was coming into the world. There was this famine. Now, we don't know exactly what the circumstances were. It's very interesting. Like, the Torah doesn't say what the circumstances were that caused the famine. Was it because there was no rain? Was it because they had, bad agricultural practices? It doesn't say why there was a famine. It doesn't say. Right? But be that as it may, the point is, there was a problem building up. There was a problem building up in the world. Yosef was the solution to that problem. VaYikra Rav al haaretz shalach lifnei Ish. The response to the Rav was the Ish, meaning Yosef. But Yosef was not quite ready to deal with this problem that was coming. He was literally meant to save the world. Yosef is literally saving the world. He wasn't quite ready to take on that challenge. So God needed to forge him. He needed to prepare him for this task, saving not only his family but the entire world. Rabosai, if Yosef knew what exactly had happened to him, that his jealous brothers had managed to sell him to slavery, and his father was looking for him and suffering terribly because he had gone missing, what would Yosef have been thinking about the entire time that he was in Mitzrayim? How do I get back to my family? How do I make contact with my father? How do I get out of here? That's what he would have been thinking about. But now that he thinks that he's been kicked out of the food, as tragic as it was, he thinks that he's kicked out of his family. So if he thinks that, he says, listen, it's terrible. It's terrible that I'm in this situation, but I have to deal with what is, rather. Okay, I'm in Mitzrayim. I'll make the best of it, right? I'll work, okay, so I'm a slave boy. I'll work my way up. He starts off as a teenager, sold into slavery in a foreign country. He works his way up to be the chief of staff of a very high official, given tremendous power and responsibility. Even when he's thrown into prison, he can't escape the keen eye of the Egyptian officials for talent. He's put in charge of the prison. Okay, and then after almost 2 decades of running these big operations in the Egyptian bureaucracy, then he's ready to be noticed by Paro and say, listen, I'm going to put you in charge. Ad eis bo dvaro imras Hashem tzrafasu. The word of God forged him throughout all of those years, and it was absolutely necessary for Yosef to not know what was going on in order for him to focus on what he needed to focus on, in order to build him up to the place where he could actually be the guy to respond to this global crisis. And he had to be in this state of ignorance. Yes?
If he felt that he was adrift by family, he wasn't part of Yaakov Shem, why would he still be like Yisham Kim? Why would he care Shem Yisham?
Why is it a stira? If you're not part of the Jewish people, you can still be a God-fearing person.
So early.
In fact, that's one of the milos of Yosef HaTzadik, that he didn't feel that obligated because of his familial connection. Actually, now that you're mentioning this, there's a midrash in Tanat Be'Eliyahu Rabbah, Perk Chaf Beis Chaf Gimel, somewhere around there. It says that it lists a bunch of righteous individuals throughout the generations, that they had unique merit, that they stayed loyal to the Torah despite the fact that they had no obligation to do it. It says Shomer HaTorah Lifnei Shenitna. And this is not like the Bavli says about the Avos, that they kept the Torah before it was given. It's not the same type of thing. These individuals, and Yosef is one of them, these individuals, they had no connection at all. They had no external obligation. They had no pressure to keep the Torah. You could say, if you're part of the Jewish people, you're born into it, you feel okay, this is my path, this is what I'm going to do. Okay, you could have your personal devotion, obviously, for sure, but Yosef, again, he literally thought that he was kicked out of the family, and he still remained loyal to whatever extent that he was, right? To the whole, to the God awareness, and ad kidei kach, Chazal say, right? Vayar Adonov ki Hashem imo, Havaya imo. I forget if we talked about this midrash before. We didn't talk about it. In Parshas VaYeshev, it says about Potiphar that he notices Yosef. It says Vayar Adonov ki Hashem imo, not Elokim, not the generic deity. Hashem, Havaya, Yud Kei Vav Kei. His master sees that Havaya imo, and says the midrash, Shem Shamayim Shgura Befiv, that Yosef is constantly uttering the name of God, and not the generic God, not Elokim, but Havaya, the God of the Hebrews, the God of the Ivrim. He's constantly saying. So he says, there must be a connection between this guy, between the hatzlacha and the bracha, the success and the blessing that this guy is bringing. Everything that he touches turns to gold. There must be a connection between this havaya that he's constantly talking about and all the success. And that's why he's confident to put him in charge. So you see that Yosef is very, very unique, despite the fact that he's literally a teenager and he's literally kidnapped and he's literally sold as a slave. He still remains loyal. He still remains loyal to this derech, despite all of that. So that's one of the great merits of Yosef HaTzadik. And this is the path of being forged. It's like being forged, the tzarafashu is dependent on you staying the course. Like, you could choose to get off the train if you want. Like Yosef could have chosen to get off the train. He's like, okay, listen, I was kicked out of the family, no longer interested in anything. I'm just gonna, do what I need to do to survive. He could have done that. He could have chosen to give in to the Eishes Potiphar, right, temptation. He could have done that also. Right? I'm sure he could have made his way, on that route as well. But he didn't. He chose to stay on a certain route. He chose to go with the project. This highlights, Rabbi Osai, the necessity of the ignorance that Yosef HaTzadik experienced during this whole time, and how it was instrumental in bringing about the salvation that it brought about. Now, to end off here, I wanna hone in on a slightly different topic that we find much later on in Jewish history, and try to tie it back to what we're talking about now. This is Tehillim. Can I have the VaYigash for a second? There's an incident in the life of David HaMelech. It's relatively well known at the very, very end of David HaMelech's life, or toward the end, where David HaMelech decides that he's going to count the Jewish people. He's going to take a military census of the Jewish people, and God is not happy about this at all. Like, not good. And there's a huge plague that hits the Jewish people as a result of this sin. And the Mefarshim really struggle to try to understand what exactly is going on with this whole incident. Why does David want to count the people to begin with? And also, even more puzzling, is why is it such a big deal? Why is it such a horrible sin, this horrible calamity befalls the Jewish people as a result of doing this counting? It's very, very strange. And what's even more, and the third question, which is equally as mysterious, is why is it that this is the impetus for David HaMelech establishing the Makom HaMikdash? At the end of the story, David HaMelech purchases the Goren Aravna HaYavusi, the threshing ground of Aravna, meaning the mountain that's right outside. He buys that spot as a response to this, and that fixes everything. This is extremely puzzling. And the Mefarshim really struggle with this. Okay? I'm reading from Divrei Hayamim. This story is brought both in Shmuel Beis, at the very end of Shmuel Beis, in Perek Chaf Aleph, and it is also brought in Divrei Hayamim Aleph, Perek Chaf Aleph. We will start from Divrei Hayamim because it just gives them a lot more details, and then we'll go to Shmuel just to read what the Malbin has to say. It's the Malbin's note that I wanted to get to, but we'll get there. Anyway, Vayamod Satan al Yisrael vayoses es David limnos es Yisrael. So David experiences this godly wrath that confuses him and pushes him to want to count the Jewish people. Vayomer David el Yoav. He goes to his minister of defense and he says to him, L'chu sifru es Yisrael mi Be'er Sheva ve'Adam va'aviu elai ve'adaras misparam. Go and count the Jewish people because I want to know their number. Vayomer Yoav. Listen to what Yoav responds. Yoav says, Yosef Hashem alamo kahem mea pa'amim. God can make the Jewish people even 100 times more numerous. Halo Adoni HaMelech kulam la'Adoni la'avadim. They are all your loyal servants. Lama yivakesh zos Adoni. Lama yela Hashem b'Yisrael. Why are you asking this? Why should there be this sin amongst the Jewish people? Udvar Melech Chazak al Yoav. But David doesn't back down, and his word is strong onto Yoav, meaning he insists. And Yoav goes out as the king demands of him, and he goes and he counts the whole people, and he comes back to Yerushalayim with the number. So, and he gets the census, and they know the number. Now, immediately afterwards, and God is very, very angry about this. Vayachas Yisrael, and he strikes the people of Israel in response to this. Vayomer David El Elohim, and David immediately recognizes that he made a very big error with this. Chatasi ma'od, I've sinned greatly. Asher asisa es hadavar hazeh. V'ata haverna es avon avdecha ki niskalti me'od. Please remove my sin. And God, the prophet of that time, he comes to David and he tells him, listen, God is going to punish you for this, and you can choose what your punishment is. You can choose which punishment you want. Im shalosh shanim rav, you can choose 3 years of famine. Shlosha chadashim nispe b'nei tzarecha, you can choose to be chased by your enemies for 3 months. Okay, a 3-month war which will go bad. Right, 3 months of fighting in which things will go bad for you. Okay, oh shloshes yamim cherev, or 3 days of total annihilation to be brought upon the people. Choose which one you want. Vayomer David el Gad. So David says back to God, Tsar li ma'od, I'm in a tight spot. This is not good. So what should I do? Nipla na biyad Hashem, let us fall into the hands of God. Uviyad adam alapola. It's better to be in the hands of God. If I'm going to be punished, better to receive a punishment directly from God and not to receive a punishment through the hands of man. Meaning, don't let me be in the hands of material things or to be chased by my enemies. If I'm going to get the punishment, I want it directly from God. So he chooses the 3 days of plague. The 3 days of plague. And this is indeed what happens. There's 3 days of plague. And there are literally tens of thousands of people dying in the streets on a daily basis. 70,000 people die in the course of 3 days. That's unbelievable. That's like a faster rate than any other calamity in Jewish history, almost. Yeah, I think it's faster than any other calamity. Like, it's a faster death rate. Okay? It's a lot of people. And God sends an angel to Jerusalem to destroy it. And David lifts up his eyes. Vayares malach Hashem umeid bein ha'aretz u'bein hashamayim v'charbo shlufo biyado. Vayipol David v'azkenim mechusim b'sakim al pneihem. And David and all the elders are wearing sackcloth, meaning because they're mourning. They're mourning throughout this whole period as they're seeing this plague befall the people. And when they see the angel, they see prophetically this angel who's delivering the blows that are striking down all these people. They fall on their faces. And at that moment David says to God, hello, I'm the one who chose to count the people. I'm the one that brought about this plague. I'm the one who sinned and did evil. The Eila Hatzon and my sheep, also, what did they do? You should only strike me and do not put your hand onto your nation. God, and in response to this, the angel, the Grim Reaper, who's killing everyone, turns to God and he says to him, Le'mor David, go tell David, ki ya'aleh David la'akim mizbeach la'Hashem begoren Arnon hayavusi. Go tell him that the solution to this problem is to go and build a mizbeach on the threshing ground of Arnon. And indeed, David goes. Arnon insists, take it for free. I don't want to buy it. Does that sound familiar, by the way? Take it for free. I don't want to buy it. And what does David respond? Vayomer HaMelech David la'Arnon, lo, ki kano ekneh bekesef moleh, bekesef moleh, bekesef moleh yitnena li besochachem la'achuzas kaver, right? Bekesef moleh, ki lo esa asher lacha Hashem ba'alos olos chinam. I'm not going to bring sacrifices for free. Vayitein David la'Arnon b'makom, at that very moment, without delay, shiklei zav mishkal sheish me'os. He pays him 600 talents of gold for the spot, and as Chazal say, 600 because it was 50 shekels from each shevet, right? It was like a collective purchase for the whole Jewish people, and so, end of the story. What is going on? What is going on? Why does David want to count the people? Why is it such a problem that he's counting the people? How is the Mizbeach at the threshing ground of Arnon the Jebusite a solution to this problem? What is going on? What is going on? So, we can get a hint already in the response that Yoav gives to David when he says, why do you want to do this? All the Jewish people are your loyal servants. Avadim, ne'emanim, they are loyal servants. Why are you doing this? Why are you going to bring about an ashma, a guilt onto the people for no reason? They're all your loyal servants. So the parish that I believe that hashes out this problem the best, and I believe in the only definitive way, frankly, is the Malbim on Shmuel Bey's Perek Chaf Daled. The same exact story that we read with a few missing details is brought in Shmuel Bey's Perek Chaf Daled as well. And And the Malbim says the following. I'm not going to quote it inside because it's kind of long. You can see it's quite a long section. We'll just give you the highlights. The Malbim says the following. The Malbim says that it was at this time that David, after suffering the rebellion of Avshalom, that a sizable portion of the Jewish people sided with his rebellious son. A sizable amount. And there was a civil war to reinstall David as king and to put down the Avshalom coup. So David is in a state where he's a little bit antsy. He's like, what's going to happen if there's another war and I have to call upon the people to fight for me? Who's going to show up? Maybe there are people that aren't so interested. Maybe there are people that are still, kind of on the fence. Just like, if there were people that were willing to participate in an outright coup against me, maybe there are people that aren't so interested in helping me fight a war. So what do you do when you want to make sure that people are going to show up for a war? You take a census. And you have everyone's number, and you know where everyone lives, because when you call them, you want to know where everyone is. This is the motivation for the census, and it's explicit that this is the motivation for David, and this is why Yoav says to David, "Why do you feel a need to count them? They're all your loyal servants. You're being paranoid, David. You're being paranoid. They're not trying to make another coup against you. They're not gonna betray you when there's a war. They're all gonna come if you call them. Hayu la'avadecha ne'emanim. They are all your loyal servants. You don't need to do this." But David does do it. And what's the problem when you do this? What's the problem when you take a census that is clearly out of motivation because you suspect that there's portions of the people that aren't loyal? What are you doing? You're creating a tremendous, tremendous lack of confidence within the nation itself. That's what you're doing. When you go out, the king says, listen, guys, there's people among us who are not on the same page. They're not going to show up when we need to fight a war. So we need to take a census of everyone in order to know where everyone is so that when we fight a war, everyone will show up. How horrible is that? Can you just imagine how horrible that would be? I want to share you a personal story. I just thought of this because I had a similar experience like this. In the army, early on in the army, when we still didn't know anything, so we were very, very intimidated by every small little thing. But there was actually a real serious incident, that there were a few chayalim in the pluga, in the company, that they were caught doing very, very inappropriate things with their assault rifles, and obviously anything outside, right, divergent of the very few things that you're allowed to do with your weapon is considered very, very serious. They found that there were a few people doing this. So at 3 o'clock in the morning one night, they pulled everyone out of bed, and they did a whole, mamish, like a concentration camp style, like lineup, and we're screaming at people and yelling at people. It was really, really unpleasant. And they brought everyone to the, to the lecture hall, and they had all the officers scream at us. It was really, really unpleasant. And the whole time we knew that it was maybe 2, maybe 3 people out of this group of 100 guys that did something, but everyone was suffering, and no one knew who it was. It's like, was it that guy? I saw that guy. He was fooling around the other day. It was probably him. No, it was probably that guy because he doesn't care. He doesn't listen to the rules anyway. Everyone's looking at the other guy, thinking that it was him who did this. You understand when you have a group of people that they all need to count on each other, and suddenly the one in charge says there are people among us who are a 5th column. Do you understand how bad this is? This is this is not just to know, okay, how many people are in this battalion, that battalion. Obviously, practically, you need to know, which is why the Torah itself tells us that we need to count the army in order to know how many people are in the army. The Torah does that multiple times. But this was different. This was not motivated out of a practical need to know how many people are in each platoon. This is because David wants to know where the guys are so that when the time comes, he'll be able to know who the traitors are. And that is the ashma, the guilt that he brings upon the people. This is a national level. This is like a calamity. This is like a real crisis, a crisis of trust that David brings upon the Jewish people. And this is the calamity. This is the calamity that he brings. And how is it that the solution to this problem is the Goren of Arnon HaYavusi, the threshing ground of Arnon? Because this is the Makom HaMikdash. The Makom HaMikdash that he buys with 600 shekels because he takes 50 shekels from each shevet. This is the collective project of the Jewish people. What is the solution to disunity? A collective project. And what's the collective project of the Jewish people? It's not having a bake-off or a running marathon. The collective project of the Jewish people is the Beis HaMikdash. That's the collective project. Ir Shechubra Lo Yachtav. It's the city that brings everyone together. This is the tikkun. This is the solution. There's a parak of Tehillim that many people read every day. Parak Lamed of Tehillim. What is Parak Lamed of Tehillim written for? It's not a trick question. Chanukas Habayis. Mizmor Shir Chanukas Habayis LeDavid. The song that David made when he consecrated the place that the Beis HaMikdash was going to be built. Meaning, right after this story happens. This is the Parak of Tehillim that he writes right after this happens. Okay? So let's look at the words over here. Aramimcha Hashem ki tidisanu v'lo semachta oivai li. I lift you up, God, because you raised me up and you did not let my enemies rejoice over me. David was given a choice. He said, listen, I'll give you a choice. You can either fall at the hands of your enemies or you can suffer a plague for 3 days. David says, no, nifla nabiyad Hashem, ubiyad adam alapola. I want to only be in your hands, God. And by the hands of man, I don't want to be. Lo simachto evai li, you didn't let my enemies triumph over me. Shivati elecha vatir pa'eni, I prayed to you and you healed me from the magefa, from this plague that was killing everyone. You healed me. Zamu Hashem chasid v'ozer kadsho, all of your chasidim, all of your righteous, all the ones who are devoted to you will call upon your name and praise you. Ki rega ba'apo, for a small moment we experienced your wrath. Chaim birtzono, and then at the end there was life. At the end of this plague there was life. Ba'erev yalin bechi. Last night we went to sleep crying. Ulaboker rina, and we woke up this morning and everything was okay. I said in my state of shalva, in my state of tranquility, I will never fall ever. But you, God, with your will, you put me up into a state of strength. Says Rashi, I was in a state of tranquility. And I thought that I would never fall. But that's not true. That's a false sense of security. I'm not actually in a state of security. Because it's not in my power to give me security. It's in God's hands. God wills it and He gives me strength. As Gedulasi and all my greatness. Leos Oz, to be strong. But the second that God hides His face, Miyad Haisi Nivhal. Nivhal, I was petrified. Petrified! What is he petrified from? He's petrified from the angel, the grim reaper who's literally killing tens of thousands of people in the streets of Jerusalem. By Yipol Panav, he falls on his face. David says, Ani Amarti B'Shalvi, I thought that I was in a state of tranquility. I had this, I was in control. I was going to count all of the people in my army. I was going to know exactly where everyone is. And when there was a war, I was going to be able to call all of them together. But it's not dependent on me. It's in God's hands. God decides whether I win the wars or whether I'm successful. So if I do something against His will in order to be successful, that's counterproductive. By definition, it's counterproductive. Hafachta mispedi lemacholi. You took the mispade, the eulogies, and you turned it into dancing of joy. Pitachta saki, the sackcloth that I was wearing. David and the Zikanim, as we read, they're coming in sackcloth. They're walking the streets of Jerusalem in sackcloth because of the ubiquitous death that's just surrounding them. You removed the sackcloth and you girded me with joy. In order so that I can praise you, I will praise you always. This parak of Tehillim explicitly is referring to to the whole story. The whole story, the lessons that the experience that David went through, and the lessons that he gleaned from it. That's one story that's being told here, Rabbosai. There's another story that's being told in this parak, Toch Kedei. There's another story. There's another story that's being told here. Listen very carefully. I prayed to you and you healed me. You brought me out of the depths. Bor. Who gets lifted out of the pit? Who gets lifted out of the pit, Rabbosai? Who's the one that gets lifted out of the pit? Yosef gets lifted out of the pit. Okay? In one moment I experienced your wrath, but then the very next second, everything was great. We woke up and we were smiling. Ma betza bidami biriditi el shachas. What gain will there be in my blood if I go down to the depths? Who says this, Rabbosai? Ma betza bidami biriditi el shachas. After they throw what? After they throw Yosef into the pit, what does Yehuda suggest? What does Yehuda suggest? After they throw him into the pit, they're going to kill him. And Yehuda says, you know what? We shouldn't kill him. We should sell him into slavery instead. Why? Ma betza. What will we gain? Ki na'arog es achinu. If we kill our brother, v'chisinu es damo. And cover his blood. Ma betza bidami. What gain will there be with the blood? Ma betza bidami. Hafachta mispadi lemacholi. You took my mispade, my eulogy, and you turned it into joy. Pitachta saki v'ta'azreni simcha. And you took off my sackcloth and you gave me joy. Who's that referring to? Who's that referring to? Ki ereid el beni yagon she'olah. I will perpetually mourn my son. Vayasem sak b'masnav. Yaakov is wearing sackcloth and ashes for 20 years, mourning over his child. The last pasuk. The last pasuk is also Yaakov, but before we get to Yaakov, just let's wait 1 second. I'm reading from the Hakdama of Rabbeinu Zrachia Halevi, the Baal HaMaor. The Baal HaMaor was an incredible personality. One of the Chachmei Provence. Very, very soon after the Rif, Rav Yitzchak Alfasi, the Baal HaMaor at least began writing the Baal HaMaor when he was 19 years old, and finished it not so long after. In fact, the impetus for the Ramban writing the Milchamos Hashem, the Wars of God, as a response to the Baal HaMaor, was because, he says, like, what is this little kid doing, attacking Zeh? The Baal HaMaor is ruthless in attacking the Rif. Absolutely ruthless. There's one particular line in the beginning of Maseches Beitza that comes to mind. There's a big machlokas Rishonim about how to understand muksa on Yom Tov versus muksa on Shabbat. And there's a machlokas if the halacha is like Rabbi Shimon, which is the minimalist view of muksa, if that applies to Yom Tov and Shabbat, or if the halacha is like Rabbi Shimon only on Shabbat, but we pass on like Rabbi Yehuda on Yom Tov, which is a more maximalist view. There's a big machlokas about this. Now, the Rif holds one position, and the Baal HaMaor disagrees, and he says the following. He says, "V'tzarech hakor lizar ma'od b'divrei Rabbeinu Yitzchak." The reader, needs to be very, very careful when he reads the words of Rav Yitzchak, meaning the Rif, right? Ki lo sam libo badavar hazeh v'nit'a. He did not pay attention to anything, and therefore he was confused. Okay? It's unbelievable. You have to be very careful when you read the Rif, because he's just not paying attention. Just wasn't on the ball. He's not on the ball. So he's just ruthless. And this is literally a 19-year-old kid writing this. It's unbelievable. And we're going to see now just like the breadth of this personality just in these few lines that we're going to read. This is the Hagdama. This is the Hagdama to the Baal HaMaor. B'mkomos rabim bakosov, in many places in Kisvei HaKodesh, nikres hanefesh, the soul, okay, is referred to kavod. The word kavod is used to refer to the soul. Kedichsiv, l'chein samach libi, my heart will rejoice, vayagel kavodi, and my kavod will be happy. Uchsiv ura kavodi, awaken my kavod, meaning awaken my soul. Uchsiv lamani zamercha chavod, lamani zamercha chavod. This pasuk, last pasuk of Perek Lamed that we're reading now. That my kavod, that my soul will sing to you. Ki habora itzla al ha'adam mikise kavodo, because God bequeathed to man the soul from the throne of glory. Uva nasan alav mehodo, and he gave from his awesome light down to the individual. Hu etzem anichsaf el yisodo, and the soul yearns for its source constantly. Meaning the soul was taken from the Kisei HaKavod, and the soul yearns to rejoin back to the Kisei HaKavod. K'mo choshek asher nechsaf ledodo, like a lover yearns for the beloved. The Chochmei HaMechkar karu kisei hakavod galgal haseichel, and this is why those philosophers call the kisei hakavod the orb of the intellect. Not the intellect like intellectual, like we call seichel, like the ethereal bodies. It's the source of all ethereal bodies, meaning it's the source of all spirit. The source of all spirit, meaning there's the source of spirit, and then each individual has like a piece of that spirit. Ve'amru ki bizrach oro v'hu or hachayim ala nefesh, when the light emanating from the kisei hakavod shows onto the individual soul, tazhir kezoar harakia, the soul shines back with that light. Umatzdike harabim kikochavim liolam, as the pasuk says that those who give righteousness to the masses will shine like the stars. Al kain malei cheshek leiv kol chacham leiv, all the wise yearned with all of their hearts lidrosh v'lator ba'chochma, in order to seek out wisdom, lahavinu la'askil im la'yamini im la'asmil, in order to understand the proper path in halacha, bein emes ubein sheker, whether truth or whether it's true or wrong, lahoros la'avdil, and to discern and to give proper rulings, because this is the light from the kisei hakavod. They're seeking out the light that's emanating out from the kisei hakavod. V'yesh asher yigbar hacheshek hazeh, and there are those who that yearning will be so great, ad sheyira kechoshek hayotze miderech hatznius, that you go out from the path of modesty, meaning you start acting almost in a bizarre fashion. Bezeh nirmaz b'Moshe Rabbeinu b'hasiro masveh haboshes me'al panav. Kenyan shene'emar va'adabra be'dosecha neged melachim v'lo evosh. No, excuse me, I skipped a line. Sorry. B'masveh shahaya Moshe masir me'al panav. This is the remez, says the Baal HaMaor, that Moshe had a masveh on his face, that he was constantly in a state of seclusion and withdrawal and tznius, modesty. But when he went in to speak to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he removed the masveh, he removed the covering from his face. The kabel zoar hahod, the karnei hakavod, and from there he received that light. He received that light that we're talking about, the light that emanates out of the kisei hakavod and shines upon the soul, and the soul reflects that light back. So too Moshe went and he takes the partition away from his face in order to receive the light from the kisei hakavod, and that light shines back. The rays of light are bouncing back off of his face. This is a quote from the Gemara in Baba Basra on Daf Kuf Ayin Aleph that Rabbeinu HaKadosh, meaning Rabbi Yehuda Anasi, says, I acted like a child. The He'azti Panai Benosan Habavli. The context over there is that they're talking about a certain halacha in Dinei Shtaros, and Rabbi Yehuda Anasi, because he's so energetic about asking a kasha on Rabbi Nosson Habavli, so he starts screaming and yelling right there in the Beis HaMedrash. Right? He says Yaldus Haisabi. I acted like a small child. Even though Rabbi Yehuda Anasi was known to be a very modest and quiet, humble person, he went out of his kalim. He just lost all boundaries. This is the beginning of Baba Basra. That Rav Chadvoi, he attacked Rav Sheshas with this very, very belittling and demeaning joke, because he couldn't take what was apparent to him as like a very misled approach of Rav Sheshas. The Amar Rav Papa call Hai Milsa. This is in Gemara in Brachos toward the end of Daf Samach something. Ki Hai Milsa Nema Inish Chaimei Rabei V'lo Lishtok. Right? If a person has something to respond to what his Rebbe says, he shouldn't quiet himself. Tichsiv im navalta bisnasei im zamanta yad lapeh. If you woe on to those who put their hand to their mouth and don't respond. Meaning, when you have something to say in matters of Torah, don't be modest. Don't hold yourself back. You have to remove the partition from your face. There's a time to be tsanua, there's a time to be modest and withdrawn, but there's a time to remove the partition from your face. And seeking out wisdom, seeking out that light that's emanating off of the kisei hakavod so that your soul can shine in response, that's the time to remove the partition. That's the time to remove the mask. The time to remove the separation. Le'inyanenu. And I mean, this is all le'inyanenu, but just to start bringing it back. This last verse, which is referring to Yaakov Avinu, I was lamenting the death of my son for all this time, and I had sackcloth. I was wearing sackcloth for this whole time. You remove the sackcloth, that my soul could sing to you. that my soul could sing to you. When Yaakov hears about the fact that his son Yosef is still alive, at first he doesn't even believe them. He's so shocked he can't even believe them. Okay? But when he sees he sees all the wealth that was brought down from Egypt and the wagons that he was brought for that Yosef sent to bring him back to Egypt. Vatechi ruach Yaakov aviyah. And the spirit of Yaakov came back to life. Says Unklus, Vatechi ruach Yaakov aviyah. Ushras ruach nevodi al Yaakov avuhon. The spirit of prophecy came back to Yaakov. At that moment, the spirit of prophecy came back to him. Meaning Yaakov, because of his state, he was so crushed, he was so depressed for that whole time that he was removed from the light of God. He was removed from the spirit of prophecy. And at that moment that he was told that his beloved son was in fact still alive, that spirit came back to him. Laman yizamercha chavod, that my soul can sing to you again. The ruach nevuah came back to Yaakov Avinu. Laman yizamercha chavod v'lo yidom. Hashem Elokai li'olam odeka. Two stories being told simultaneously. Now, here's the question: what does the consecration of the Beis Hamikdash have to do with the story of Yosef and his brothers? We see this is clearly being alluded to. That term, by the way, just as a parenthetical note, ma betza, what gain will we have? That term appears 3 times in all of Kisvei HaKodesh. Once by Yosef and his brothers, one time here, and another time in Malachi, which is not really connected at all. But juxtaposed to dam, ma betza bidami, what gain will there be from my blood? That, right, those 2 times, right? Ma betza ben ha'orgas achinu v'chisinu es damo, the connection to the blood. Right? What gain will there be in the blood? Yeah. Anyway, what does the establishment of the Beis Hamikdash have to do with the story of Yosef and his brothers? Let's go all the way back to the beginning of the Yaakov story, Rabbi Shammai. All the way back to the beginning. Yaakov Avinu, he has to run away from Eretz Yisrael. He has to run away from Esau, who's trying to kill him. And he goes to Padan Aram, and he comes to VaYigash b'makom. He comes to the Makom Hamikdash. VaYigash b'makom v'yolen sham. VaYikach me'avnei hamakom, and he takes from the stones of the place. And he has this incredible vision, which we've talked about, the ladder, and God gives him a promise that he will be the perpetuator of the Avram Avinu project. And Yaakov wakes up. VaYikach es ha'even, the one stone that he had put, asher sam mirash osav, that he had put under his head. Vayasem oso matzeva, and he makes it a monument. And he swears to God, if you fulfill your promise to me, ha'emen hazot asher samti matzeva tiyeh beis elokim. It will be the house of God. This stone will be the house of God. Says the Pirkei Rabbi Elazar. Lokach Yaakov 12 avonim. Yaakov took 12 stones. Mehamizbeach shene'ekad alav Yitzchak aviv, from the altar that Yitzchak his father was bound upon. The altar is there. He's on Har Moriah. The altar that Yitzchak was bound upon was still there. He takes 12 of those stones, 12, puts them around him, wakes up in the morning, they're all one stone. They're all one stone. And he erects it. Right, he puts the stone up. He makes it a monument. What did God do? Noto raglo yimino. God took his right foot. V'tava ha'eved ad imke ha'tahom, and he stamps the stone into the ground. V'asa also snif la'aretz, completely fused to the earth. Kadam she'osa snif la'kippah. V'fikach nikres even ha'shesiyah. And that's why it's called the foundation stone. Shemisham hu tavor haaretz, because it is connected to the depths of the earth. That Evan, that rock that Yaakov Avinu made as a monument and said, this will be the Beis Elokim, this will be the house of God. This is the Evan HaShasiyah. This is the foundation of the Mikdash. The 12 stones that became one. The 12 Shvatim that come together, they make the Mikdash. It's the foundation of the Mikdash. as Yaakov is starting his journey to go through the decades of strife that he had to go through in order to produce his family, to produce the 12 tribes of Israel, he's shown this symbolically. This will be the house of God, the 12 stones coming together to make the foundations of the temple. The whole story of Yaakov Avinu's family, of all the familial strife, and all the bickering, and all the fighting, and all the war, and all the warring, and all the horrible trauma and suffering that goes on in this, that whole process was the stones, the 12 stones, coming together, fusing together to make the foundations of the Mikdash. And in this parsha, when it all comes back together, that the 12 brothers are all able to be together. They're all able to reconcile and come together. That is the Chanukas Habayis. That is the founding of the temple. And just as David, he did the same thing. He sowed the strife within the Jewish people. By counting the Jewish people, that was the whole chait. That he made this incredible perud amongst the Jewish people, this incredible schism. That everyone's doubting each other. There's a total collapse of trust. And the solution to that was to literally build the Beis HaMikdash. So too, the reconciliation of the Jewish people, and the Jewish people at that time being Yaakov and his family, the reconciliation of the Jewish people are the stones fusing together to found the Beis HaMikdash. The first founding of the Beis HaMikdash was Yaakov, and with his Even HaShesiyah, Ha'even Hazos, Asher Samti Matzivati Beis Elokim. This rock will be the house of God. The first Chanukas HaMizbeach was here. And that's why David is recalling this story as he's actually founding the Beis HaMikdash. It's all coming back together now. All coming back together. Takes decades, Rabbosai. Yaakov Avinu is 70 years old when he leaves Canaan, or maybe he's 60 when he leaves, and he has that gap in between. But he's 70 at that story. He's 70 when he has this dream and makes this monument. How old is he now at the end of the story? He's 170 years old, 170 something. So 100 years, a century, a journey to solidify the foundations of the Mikdash. When there can be this reconciliation produces the foundations of the Mikdash. And all of the lessons that we learn from here, is the process of building the Mikdash, the process of bringing the Jewish people together as a collective entity in order to have the Hashras Hashchina in the world, in order to save the world. To save the world and bring the Hashras Hashchina back into the world and bring prophecy back into the world. Ruach Nevuah al Yaakov Avuam, that Yaakov was revivified. It's the Hashras Hashchina coming back into the world. This is all coming together in order to do that, and to hone in on this last point that the Bala Ma'or ties in, which isn't directly related. Meaning, it's not like the Bala Ma'or wrote this Hakdama for our conversation, right? He just happens to tie these two things together in the same section. When a person is seeking out Chachma, when a person is seeking out to cleave back onto their source, right? The thing that they know that they're meant to be attached to, right? When the soul, which is a fractured sliver from the Kisei HaKavod, yearns to reattach to its source, you have to remove the mask. You can't be withdrawn. You have to remove the masveh. Remove the partition. This entire story is a story of rejection at every possible level. The brothers feel that they're rejected by their father because they're not really beloved, and he kind of hated their mother. He doesn't really love them. They felt rejected. Yosef feels rejected because he thinks that he's sold into slavery by his father. Right? Yaakov feels abandoned by God. Everyone feels abandoned. And Yaakov literally was abandoned. He didn't experience prophecy for 20 years. Everyone is abandoned. And the salvation, the redemption of this family is realizing that they were never abandoned. No one was ever abandoned. They had to go through a process that was necessary, that they were in a state of abandonment, but they weren't really abandoned. For all of those years they were withdrawn. They had the covering over their face. But when it came time for the redemption to happen, all the partitions were removed. Yosef cannot, right? And with Yosef, it's like literally true. Yosef is able to reveal himself. The brothers didn't know who this guy was. He could have been wearing a mask for all they cared. He's just some mysterious person. Yosef literally removes the mask. Right? Everyone, all the masks come down. Because when we're seeking the reconciliation, when we're seeking the Hashras HaShechina, the reuniting with those who we are meant to love and reuniting with the ultimate love, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when reuniting with our love, all of the partitions come down. And this is the process. This whole story is an acting out of the fundamental dynamic of the Jewish people. From the fracture all the way through the reconciliation to the building of the temple. And this is played out in a microcosm, which was played out later in history with David in a macrocosm, which will again be played out again, right here. We have a front row seat. It will be played out right here. Just got to be ready. We know what it looks like. We have several versions of it. We know what it looks like. We're ready for it. We don't know what the next version is going to look like exactly. It's going to have a different version, but it's going to be the same story. Bezrat Hashem.
We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. If you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.